Story 1. The Last Customer. I currently live in Washington State, up in the Pacific Northwest, but I didn't grow up here. I spent my early 20s waitressing in the South, where hospitality is practically a religion, and customers want to know your whole life story before they order their sweet tea. But up here, it's different. People are polite, sure, but there's a coldness to it, an introversion that hangs in the air like the constant mist. They keep to themselves. At the time of this story, I was 29 and working the closing shift at a diner off the side of a lonely highway. We stayed open until 2 a.m., which was honestly ridiculous considering how desolate the area was, but we usually had a straggler or two to justify the lights being on. On this particular night, however, the place was a ghost town. It was just me and the chef in the back, watching the clock tick down. Around 1 a.m., the door chimed. In walked a lone man. He was heavy-set, looking like he had been cut out of a 1980s Polaroid. He was wearing awkwardly high-waisted jeans, a gray shirt tucked in tight, a brown jacket, and he sported a thick brown mustache and glasses. He had this permanent, plaster-fixed smile on his face that didn't quite reach his eyes. I went into customer service mode, asking if he wanted a booth or the bar. He chose a table, still grinning. I handed him a menu and gave him the standard warning. Kitchen closes in 10 minutes. He barely looked at it before ordering a black coffee and French toast. I'm Nolan, he said, introducing himself unprompted. I took the order back to the chef, who rolled his eyes. He hated late orders, but he fired up the griddle anyway. When I went back out to wipe down counters, Nolan waved me over. This is where the cultural difference kicked in. In the South, chatting at 1 a.m. is normal. In rural Washington, it's weird. He started complaining about the potholes on the highway, blaming the winter freezes. I gave him generic customer service nods, but then he pivoted. He asked if I was from the area. When I told him I was, he pressed harder, asking specifically where I lived. Oh, just generally nearby, I lied, keeping it vague. He told me he had just moved to town. I tried to read him. He seemed like a socially awkward, nerdy older guy who might have thought he was flirting. It was annoying, but I've dealt with worse. I just wanted to go home. My social battery was dead. The chef brought the food out personally to the counter, and I ran it to the table. I spent the rest of his meal cleaning as far away from him as possible to avoid getting trapped in another conversation. I dropped the check off early, a non-verbal hint to get out. He paid by card and finally left. Once he was gone, I grabbed my stuff to leave. The chef was staying behind to lock up. When I walked out into the cool night air, I noticed something odd in the parking lot. There were 3 cars. Mine, the chef's, and a silver sedan, maybe an older Toyota or Audi. It was parked on the dirt edge of the lot closest to the highway. The windows were dark, either tinted or just reflecting the night, so I couldn't tell if anyone was inside. I got a bad feeling, wondering if it was Nolan waiting, but I shook it off and got into my car. My drive home was about 20 minutes. I was cruising down the highway, finally relaxing, when a loud ding screamed from my dashboard. The tire pressure light. I watched the digital display from my rear passenger tire plummet. 20 psi. 15. 10. The steering wheel started to shudder, and then the whole car began to shake violently. I had no choice. I pulled off onto the dark shoulder of the road. I hopped out to check, hoping it was a glitch. It wasn't. The tire was completely flat. Suddenly, high beams flooded my vision. A car pulled up behind me and slowed to a stop. Panic spiked in my chest. I scrambled back into my driver's seat and locked the doors. A moment later, there was a light tap, tap, tap on my window. I looked up. It was Nolan. He was smiling, that same plastic smile, waving at me. But something had changed. He was wearing gloves. "Kathy? Is that you?" he asked through the glass. I'm using a fake name, but he used my real one. "Are you okay?" He laughed, acting like it was this wild, funny coincidence that he just happened to be behind me. My stomach twisted into a knot. I knew instantly, this wasn't luck. He had done this. He motioned for me to roll down the window. I cracked it 2 inches, just enough to hear him. "Need some help?" he asked. "I have a flat tire," I said, my voice tight. He played dumb. "Which one?" "Back passenger side," I said. As he walked around the car to inspect the tire, I grabbed my phone and dialed 911. I put the phone in my lap, keeping it out of sight. Nolan came back to my window almost immediately. "I know how to change a flat," he said, grinning. "Why don't you step out?" "I'm waiting for my boyfriend," I lied loudly, hoping the dispatcher could hear me. "He's on his way to help me change it." I could hear the operator talking faintly from my lap, but I prayed Nolan couldn't hear it over the passing wind. I repeated myself for the operator's benefit. "I'm not sure how I got a flat, but I'm waiting for my boyfriend." "Thanks for offering to help, sir." Nolan's smile dropped. The friendly mask evaporated, leaving something cold and angry underneath. He stared at me for a second, then turned and walked away from the window. I seized the chance. I whispered frantically into the phone, "This man slashed my tire. He's trying to get me out of the car." The operator asked for my location. I frantically pulled up my GPS map and read off the road name. Smash! The driver's side window exploded inward. I screamed as shards of safety glass rained down into my lap. Nolan was there, reaching through the broken window. I shrieked, "I'm on the phone with the police!" "It's the police!" and shoved the lit-up screen toward his face. He didn't grab my throat. He didn't grab my arm. He reached in, snatched the phone out of my hand, and hurled it into the darkness of the highway. Then, just as quickly as he had attacked, he turned and ran. He sprinted back to his car, tires screeching as he peeled out, making a sharp U-turn and vanishing down the dark road. I was left alone in the silence, shaking, with no phone and no flashlight. I couldn't even go look for my phone because I was too terrified he would circle back. I just sat there in the broken glass and prayed the operator had heard my location. She had. Minutes later, I heard the most beautiful sound in the world. Sirens. I stumbled out of the car, waving my arms until the red and blue lights flooded the scene. 3 cruisers showed up. The officers were incredible. They found my smashed phone in the ditch, changed my tire for me, and one of them escorted me all the way to my driveway. They reviewed the surveillance footage from the diner later that week. They saw him. They saw the car, but the investigation stalled. They never caught him. I quit the diner immediately. I wasn't going to make it easy for Nolan to find me again. And I learned a valuable lesson that night. Sometimes the friendly neighbor is the one holding the knife, or, in this case, the tire iron. Story 2. The end of the season. I was 16 when I got my first real job, working at a sprawling amusement park in southern Ohio. It was one of those massive, aging parks that feels magical in the summer, but turns downright eerie once the leaves start to change. We were in the final weekend of the season, Fright Fest or whatever they called it, which meant the park was open late and the clientele was getting weirder by the day. It was a Sunday evening, late October. The air was crisp, and the sky was that bruised purple color you only get in the Midwest before a storm. I was manning the ring toss booth in a dead section of the park, counting down the minutes until I could clock out at 5 p.m. At 4:55 p.m., 5 minutes before freedom, a man walked up to my booth. He wasn't a dad with kids, and he wasn't a teenager on a date. He looked rough. He had a patchy, scraggly beard that looked like it hadn't seen a razor in weeks, and he was wearing a stained gray t-shirt that was way too thin for the weather, paired with sweatpants that were practically disintegrating. "Can I help you, sir?" I asked, putting on my customer service voice. He didn't answer right away. He was twitchy, his head snapping back and forth like he thought he was being hunted. It sent a shiver down my spine. "Sir?" I repeated, my patience wearing thin. He locked eyes with me. His pupils were blown wide. "Where are the bathrooms?" he whispered. It was barely a rasp, stuttering over the words. "Up the hill, take a right," I said, pointing toward the main concourse. He started walking in that direction, but he didn't look where he was going. He kept his head turned, his eyes glued to me, watching me until he disappeared around the bend. I didn't wait around. A coworker showed up to relieve me a minute later, and I practically sprinted to the employee lockers. I changed out of my uniform, punched out, and ran to the parking lot to wait for my ride. I didn't drive yet, so my older friend, Mark, he was 17, was picking me up. Mark pulled up in his beat-up sedan, and we decided to hit a diner a few miles down the road for burgers before heading home. We were sitting in a booth, eating and laughing about our shifts, when the hair on my arms stood up. I looked toward the entrance. My heart stopped. Sitting 3 tables away, alone, was the man from the park. He wasn't eating. He was just sitting there, staring directly at me. "Dude," I whispered to Mark, "that guy over there, he was at my booth. He's staring at me." Mark glanced over and shrugged. "Probably just a coincidence, man. Don't worry about it." I tried to shake it off, but I couldn't eat anymore. We paid the bill and got out of there. Mark started driving me home, a 30-minute drive through semi-rural back roads. We hit a red light about halfway home. It was pitch black outside. I casually looked out the passenger window to my right. My blood turned to ice. Sitting in a white Honda in the lane next to us was the man. He wasn't looking at the traffic light. He was leaning over his center console, his face pressed near the glass, staring right into my soul.
"Mark, he's following us!" I yelled.
Mark looked over, saw the guy, and finally panicked. "What the hell?" When the light turned green, Mark floored it. We took a bunch of random turns, circling the block near my subdivision to make sure we lost him. The white Honda didn't appear behind us. We thought we were safe. Mark dropped me off at my house. My parents and sister were out at the mall, and my dad was traveling for work, so the house was completely dark. I ran inside, locked the door, and went straight to my room upstairs. I was trying to calm down, telling myself I was just paranoid. I sat on my bed, scrolling through my phone, when I heard a soft sound. Crunch. Crunch. It was the sound of dry leaves breaking under footsteps, right outside my window. I froze. My bedroom is on the first floor. Slowly, terrified of what I might see, I crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. Standing in the middle of my front lawn, bathed in the moonlight, was the man. He was facing my window, and he was smiling. I dropped to the floor and dialed 911 so fast my fingers fumbled the buttons. I was hysterical, screaming that a man was outside my house. By the time the police cruisers rolled up 5 minutes later, the lawn was empty. They searched the neighborhood, but the white Honda and the man were gone. I quit my job at the amusement park the next day. I didn't care that there was only a week left in the season. I wasn't going back. I never saw the man again. But to this day, I never look out my bedroom window at night. Story 3. The couple at table 4. I've worked in hospitality for 6 years, mostly in diners. You learn pretty quickly that being chatty equals better tips. It's a reflex. You smile, you ask about their day, you make them feel at home. But I never thought that being nice would almost cost me my life. At the time, I was living in a converted Victorian house that had been split into 3 separate apartments. I had the middle floor. It was a rainy Tuesday night, absolutely pouring, which meant the diner was dead. I was just waiting out the clock until midnight so I could go home. Around 11:15 p.m., the door chimed. A couple walked in. The man was probably in his late 40s, confident, well-dressed. The girl with him was much younger, maybe early 20s, and looked small. Not just physically, but she held herself like she was trying to disappear. I sat them at a booth. The man did all the talking. He was charming, almost too charming. He asked me a million questions, and because the diner was empty and I was bored, I answered them. We joked about the weather, the town, the job. Then he dropped the question. "So, do you live around here all by yourself?" It seemed innocent enough in the flow of conversation. I laughed and said, "Yeah, about 10 minutes up the road. It's quiet, just how I like it." I didn't think twice about it. I even joked about how boring my life was. The girl didn't say a word the entire time, just picked at her food. They paid, left a decent tip, and walked out into the rain. I closed up shop an hour later. The rain was coming down in sheets, making it hard to see the road. When I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something that made me pause. The driveway was empty. My upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Gable, and the guy who lived downstairs were both gone. I was the only one home. I didn't think much of it, just ran inside to escape the storm. I locked the front door, the heavy wooden one and the glass storm door, and threw my keys on the counter. 10 minutes later, there was a frantic pounding on my door. My heart jumped into my throat. It was 1 a.m. I crept to the hallway and looked through the glass. Standing on my porch, drenched to the bone, was a girl in a gray hoodie. She was shivering, looking over her shoulder. "Please!" she screamed through the glass. "You have to help me! There's a man following me! Please let me in!" My instinct was to open the door. She looked terrified. But something stopped me. A sense of déjà vu. I looked closer at her face under the hood. It was the girl from the diner. The one who had been sitting with the charming man just an hour ago. "Wait!" I shouted through the door. "Weren't you just at my diner?" She froze. She didn't answer. She just turned around and started screaming again, pointing at the empty street. "He's right there! He's coming!" I looked past her. Emerging from the darkness of the street, walking slowly and deliberately toward my porch, was the man. The charming customer. The girl looked back at me, saw the realization in my eyes, and her terrified act vanished instantly. Her face went blank. She turned to the man and screamed one word. "Go!" The man dropped his slow walk and charged. He sprinted toward the door like a linebacker. I slammed the inner wooden door shut and threw the deadbolt just as a heavy body slammed against the other side.
The house shook.
I didn't wait to see if the lock would hold. I ran to the back of the apartment where the internal staircase was. This old house had a central stairwell that connected all 3 floors, with a door on each landing. I ran up to Mrs. Gable's door and banged on it, screaming for help. No answer. I ran down to the basement unit. No answer. I was completely alone in the building. I ran back into my apartment and locked the internal door that led to the stairs. I was trapped in the middle floor. I stood in my living room, shaking, listening to the rain. Silence. The banging at the front door had stopped. I thought maybe they had given up. Then I heard it. Knock, knock, knock. It wasn't coming from the front door. It was coming from the internal door, the one connected to the stairwell. They had broken into the common area. They were inside the house. "Who is it?" I yelled, my voice cracking. No answer. Just another knock. "I'm calling the police! Get out!" I screamed. "Who are you?" A voice came through the wood. Low, calm, and terrifyingly familiar. "Your blood on me." I ran to my bathroom, locked myself in, and curled up in the farthest corner with my phone. I stayed on the line with 911 for 10 minutes, sobbing quietly, terrified that the next sound I heard would be my apartment door splintering open. When the police finally arrived, they searched the property. The front door had kick marks on it, and the side door to the stairwell had been pried open. But the house was empty. They were gone. I packed a bag while the officers stood guard and drove to my parents' house that night. I couldn't stay there. I came back the next day with my dad to get the rest of my things. My upstairs neighbor was there, looking confused. He pointed to my apartment door inside the stairwell. "What's this about?" he asked. Written on the wood of my door, in thick black marker, was a message. "Thanks for the service, Beth." I moved out the next week. I don't talk to customers anymore. I don't tell anyone where I live, and I definitely don't open my door after midnight.